What if I told you the British Empire's victories in World War I were built in part on men whose names were never written in the books of history? Men who fought, bled, and died for a country that never saw them as equals. In 1914, as Europe descended into chaos, Britain turned to its colonies in Africa, places like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Sierra Leone, to reinforce its army. But these weren't trained soldiers. Many were farmers, hunters, and young men taken from their villages, forced into war for a king they'd never met. The British called them the Carrier Corps, or the King's African Rifles. They carried weapons, food, and supplies across deadly terrain, marching barefoot through malaria-infested jungles, starving, exhausted, and often unarmed. Some estimates say more than 100,000 African soldiers and porters died during World War I, yet for decades, their names were erased, their graves unmarked. One man, Private John Chilufya of northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, wrote in a letter home, "We walk with no shoes, no medicine, no rest. The white men die and they are buried with crosses. We die and we are left for the crows." That letter was never delivered. It was found years later in the archives of the Colonial Office in London. These African soldiers fought not only in Africa but also in Europe and the Middle East, where they faced the horrors of modern warfare, gas attacks, machine guns, and bitter cold they had never experienced before. When the war ended in 1918, Britain celebrated its victory. The white soldiers were welcomed home as heroes, but the African regiments, they were told to go home quietly, with no medals, no pay, and no mention in the parades. The British government even ordered that no memorials be built for African soldiers. It wasn't until the 21st century that historians uncovered the extent of this injustice. In 2021, a UK investigation finally admitted that systematic racism led to the exclusion of African and Asian soldiers from official memorials. The government issued an apology, more than a century late. But for many descendants, the apology meant little. Their great-grandfathers' bones still lie in forgotten graves, their stories nearly erased. And yet, whispers of their bravery still echo in villages across Africa. Tales of men who fought without understanding why, who carried the burdens of an empire that refused to carry theirs. These were not nameless men. They were the invisible army, the ones who built roads, carried cannons, buried the dead, and died without glory. And while history celebrated the generals and kings, it forgot the men who made their victories possible. One historian wrote, "Without Africa, the British Empire would not have survived the war. Yet without recognition, these men vanished into silence. But we can still speak their names and restore their place in history, because remembrance should never depend on race." What if your great-grandfather fought in a war the world refused to remember? Comment your thoughts below. Should forgotten soldiers like these finally get the memorials they deserve? And if you believe their stories matter, share this video. Let's make sure the world never forgets the African soldiers Britain tried to erase. Subscribe to Relic Remnants, where we uncover the lost voices of history.